Yunkai. Jon Snow. The plan is very simple, only captains can enter through the city gates. Dario said, pointing at 3 rocks on an improvised map of the Yellow City. My fellow captains, Jon and Galvart Snow will help me to take out the guards, then Grey Worm, Esser Jorah and Esser Oswell will take their men through the gates. We will take the city with the help of the people. What makes you think that the people will cooperate? Esser Jorah asked mistrustful. Because 200,000 slaves would like to be free from the wise master's chains. Old man, I took you for a smarter man after living all these years in Essos. Dario spat bitterly. Jon knew that Dario didn't like to be questioned by strangers. The Bear Knight grumped and walked away. Esser Oswell had his eyes fixed on Jon. The man who used to take care of him with Arthur was a complete stranger that didn't trust in his identity. Jon knew that but couldn't blame him. The man thought that he died 11 years ago. Jon approached to the map and pointed at the Stormcrows and the wolf pack. After the city guards call for our help, we will proceed to take out the Second Son's captains and make them turn cloaks if they want to live. He said, transmitting determination to each man present in the tent. He walked through the Targaryen camp, but Lady was missing. He feared the worst, a wolf surrounded by Dothrakis. Look for her, boy, he ordered to Ghost, and then the White Wolf started to trace his sister. They walked through Unsullied, Dothraki and Freedman when a particular voice froze Jon. He was still as the Unsullied used to be when they were guarding. Lady. A girl asked, confused. It's Lady. But how? How did you get here? The girl asked as Lady jumped and whimpered of pure happiness. I know this direwolf. It's of a young captain of the Stormcrows, my little girl, a woman said to her. Jon was still. He swallowed the lump that he felt on his throat. He was watching at his cousin. But that was impossible. Sansa was a hostage in King's Landing. How did she made her way out of that viper's nest was a mystery for him, and she was walking and talking with his grandmother, Queen Rhaella. Jon walked forward without hesitation. He had nothing to lose anymore. But that changed immediately after seeing Sansa, the same Sansa that grew up in Winterfell with him and Robb. Each step that he gave made him sweat like a pig under the sun, and his armor didn't make things easier. The chainmail under the leather and some plates made him feel heavier than ever. He stopped walking and stood there, like a statue in a temple, like a weirwood tree in Winterfell. Sansa was walking through the riders and freedmen with the Queen Mother. She helped a boy who was looking for Esser Barristan the Bold, at least that was what he managed to hear from the distance. Suddenly, Sansa stopped, frozen just like him. Her vivid blue eyes started to tear as soon as they saw each other. She was more beautiful than when he left Winterfell years ago, but she looked tired too. Jon took a deep breath and walked forward, only to be stopped by the young girl who hugged him so hard that he could hardly breathe. Jon just returned the hug, but he was more kind than Sansa and didn't asphyxiate her. He just laughed then, thanking to the gods or the destiny, his family wasn't completely gone. They broke apart only to contemplate their faces until Sansa broke the silence. Jon. How did you find me? She asked, very excited. As Robb with you? Or Mother or Esser Arthur? She didn't know anything about what happened. Did you won the war? And where's your dragon? Maybe Jon showed the pain that he felt with each question, because after that she started to pale. Jon just looked down, trying to hide his tears in front of the soldiers. We didn't win. Robb is missing. Your mother and Ashara too. Last time I saw Arthur I sent him to find someone at the wall. He said with a broken voice. I failed you. Walder Frey and Roose Bolton betrayed us in Robb's wedding. He added. I lost the army and lost my family. You. Who's Ashara? Is she who I think she is? Sansa asked, confused. I'm not your bastard cousin. Sansa, I'm not Brandon Stark's bastard, I'm Lyanna Stark's son. Robb convinced the lords to fight for me, but I failed them all anyways. He remembered the faces of the people he lost. Lady Lyanna's son. A voice behind him repeated the information with a surprised tone. Jon turned around to see Rhaella trying to touch his face. Her fingertip caressed part of his brow and beard. Her thumbs ran down his nose. She was looking directly at his eyes. Then your father is, Sansa said, but got interrupted by the Queen Mother. My Rhaegar. My brooding boy. You're my grandson, she said as her tears started to ran down her cheeks. I thought that I lost you because of the pox, she said, putting Jon's face between her hands. But he didn't had time for that then. He needed to do what was right. He unsheathed Longclaw and kneeled in front of Sansa. Now that you know my identity, I can only ask for your forgiveness, Lady Sansa. Between her tears and sobs, Sansa smiled. How can I forgive something that you didn't do? How can I judge you because of your sire or others' actions? She asks. I promise that I will avenge our family. That's my word as a knight, as your blood. He said, turning to see Rhaella directly in the eyes. Rhaella was about to say a word when Daario Naharis interrupted their conversation. Jon, it's time, he said, and left towards the city, leaving a horse for Jon. Jon immediately hugged Sansa and kissed her brow. Maybe this was the last time that they would see each other. Then he looked at Rhaella. He didn't know what to do. The queen was a stranger for him, but at the same time she was his family, his sire's mother. He tried to say something, but Rhaella just hugged him with all her strengths. It felt as sweet as Lady Ashara's hugs, and then he understood that it was sincere. He was afraid now. Afraid of leaving them alone, afraid of dying and being forgotten, afraid of what Caraxes could do if he dies. He let out a big sigh and proceeded to mount his horse to reach Daario. Protect the queen, Ghost, he ordered to his furry companion, and the direwolf immediately obeyed, sitting next to his grandmother. They got to the Stormcrow's camp with wine, a gift for the second sons. Jory was the responsible of keeping the second sons drunk enough to not represent a threat for them during the battle in the city. Jory delivered the wine successfully, and many men started to drink and sing. Even Mero was there drinking with his men. It was time, the sun was setting and they were ready to take the city. Jon felt the typical nervousness before the battle. He couldn't know if would survive to see another day, but he needed to do what had to be done. He remembered some slaves he saw when they first arrived to the Yellow City. They were being whipped for dropping some fruit baskets. His blood boiled then and was boiling now. He understood Balwick's hatred for the Slavers' Bay. It was the core of the slaves' trade. They rode to the city gates where 2 guards stood. They didn't expect what was coming. After Daario spoke with them, they opened the gates and immediately they fell dead. The captain of the Stormcrows killed them both with 2 swings of his arak. A third man tried to call for help, but Galbart Snow was fast enough with his bow to kill him before he could escape. Jon walked out and made the signal with the torch. A few minutes later, Ser Jorah and Grey Worm were there. The Unsullied were the most important part of the plan. Only they could speak with the slaves that they found in the streets and houses. They walked across the streets, killing guards and freeing slaves, until they found resistance before they could reach for the main plaza. Soon they were surrounded by soldiers ready to butcher them. Their only option was fight or die, kill or be killed. Jon never liked the idea of killing, but nothing of that mattered when he slashed through the first man who tried to bury his spear in his chest. They fought and killed as many men as they could. Bet they kept coming. Between the screams of pain and agony, Jon noticed lights coming from the main plaza. Daario. More reinforcements, he said, pointing at the torchlights approaching. Shit. Galbart, go find your men. Daario barked the order as he buried his stiletto in a soldier's throat. Galbart then ran to the gates to find his men. Now they just needed to hold on until their return. Jon parried a blow and immediately Longclaw found its way through the man's side. The noise of people marching against them grew louder. We need to fall back. Naharis, I'll tell my men to fall back, Ser Jorah yelled as he received a blow in the shoulder. Luckily for him, the shoulder plate just ablated and he managed himself to make a clean cut that spilled the man's guts on the ground. But they were mistaken. The lights weren't enemy reinforcements. It was a horde of slaves that started to attack the soldiers from behind, giving Jon and his companions the opportunity to reach the main plaza where the city's main flag was flaming. What Jon found there made him feel sick. He noticed that the sun was starting to rise above the city. The sun's first lights and the torchlights revealed one of the most grotesque crimes he ever saw. He walked forward to look closer at it. There were dead soldiers and some slaves laying on the ground, even some noble men that he recognized by the clothes they wore. But right there, blood still dripped to the ground from spikes where he saw men, women, little children and even babies impaled. He understood why the herd of slaves was helping them then. It was a gruesome view that made Jon empty his stomach in front of it. They had been fighting for hours, but killing an armed man was different from torturing children. That did the masters to show their dominance over the slaves. The bodies looked fresh enough to say that they died that same day. Why? Jon asked Ser Jorah, who was looking at the corpses too. This is how the world works here. Boy, the masters owned these people. They were just meat for them. The Bear Knight replied, patting his shoulder. A Dothraki arrived to the plaza then and talked to Ser Jorah. They exchanged some words in Dothraki, but but Ser Jorah looked surprised by the words of the rider. "What's the matter, old man?" Dario asked mockingly. He wasn't surprised with the impaled slaves in front of them. "The boys found a caravan of noblemen trying to escape from the city," Jorah replied. "They will arrive soon." Jon felt a fire starting inside him with the news. He started to feel numb as he stood there watching a little baby not much older than a few weeks. "Good," he said. "We will need a few logs. Careful, boy, we must wait for the queen's arrival to act," Ser Jorah warned him. "The queen will not want to see what we are about to do," Jon said coldly as he sat in the fountain in the middle of the plaza. "Grey Worm, would you like to help me with your men?" he asked to the commander of the Unsullied. Grey Worm showed reluctant at first, but he nodded and called for his men to talk with Jon. A few hours later the caravan arrived to the plaza with all the former masters of Yunkai that tried to escape. Each man looked more vile than the last with their silk clothes and their oiled beards. Jon felt sick of just looking at them. He perceived the same feelings emerging from Dario and Grey Worm. Both men suffered under the Slavers' control and despised their actions, which were monstrous. The masters were on their knees forming a line. Jon approached to them and observed them for a moment. "Cowards," was the only word to describe a man who was capable of impaling a newborn baby and its mother. They were kneeling in front of Jon, Dario and Grey Worm. Many of them looked scared in the presence of a few Unsullied or Dothraki. Jon knew it. He could perceive it by the expression of their faces. He slowly walked closer looking at their faces. The sound of the recently freed slaves surrounding them made him feel more confident, just like he used to be back in Westeros, but now he felt anger and the desire of taking the life of the men kneeling in front of him. "Does anyone if you speak the common tongue?" he asked angrily. A man raised his hand and walked forward. He had a short and gray beard and was completely bald. After a few steps he stopped and kneeled again. "Tell us your name," Jon ordered. "My name is Graix Nim Hyluk." The man replied respectfully. "I need you to translate for me," Jon said. "As you please, my lord." The man looked at him then. "Is that how you, Westerosi, like to be called?" asked with a peevish tone. "Limit yourself to translate," Dario barked. "Wise masters, your reign over this city and its people is over. Your slave soldiers surrendered the city. Unfortunately for you, our queen won't be very happy with this," he said as he pointed at the impaled slaves. The translator did his job without hesitation. "I don't plan to hide it from her, but I don't want to make her see the product of your savagery. Now, this is our offer for you. You can all take down the corpses to give them a proper burial, or you can tell us who's the responsible of this act of cruelty." Jon exclaimed angrily. The translator made his job and the masters started to look at each other, whispering and giving deathly glares. "You'll fall, and so will your whore queen," a man exclaimed among the masters. "If that's all you want to say, proceed with what I have ordered," Jon said. His fist was so tight that it even hurt. "It's not our fault," a man cried. "The Great Council did this. They are the ones that should pay for it," he added. "Men of the council, walk forward," Jon ordered. 50 men walked forward looking at him with hate and anger, the most despiteful creatures in the city. "There's a corpse for each one of you," he said and walked away at the same time that Grey Worm and his men started to push the members of the Great Council towards their victims. The men took down the corpses, but not without hesitation. Many of them started to cry or empty their stomachs. Fallen gods that had to pay for their sins. That's how they looked for Jon. After they finished, Jon addressed the others. "Now, I offer you two options. Stay here and bow to our new queen. Cooperate to make this a better place, keeping your lives, but not your slaves," he said, and then pointed at a log placed next to the fountain. "Or die with your old traditions. It's your choice." Many men opted for the first option. They clearly weren't all the masters. Many escaped from the city days before Daenerys' arrival. A man from the Great Council tried to join to the others, but Jon stopped him. "Oh no. The members of the council cannot choose. For your crimes against these men, women and children, I, Jon Snow, sentence you to die." The crowd went crazy when the translator repeated his words. Every former slave cheered them, but wasn't looking for approval. He had to make justice. The masters made a line and one by one they walked to the log. "The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword," his uncle Eddard taught him in Robb. When the first man came he just said the words, numbed by the situation. In the name of Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, I sentence you to die." Then Longclaw fell over the man's neck, cutting off his head with easiness, and the crowd cheered again. It was a symbolic execution. The rest of the masters were hanged, but Jon was the responsible of each execution, even when Grey Worm asked him to let him do it. Daenerys Targaryen. The arrow found its way to the target finally. She was learning to shoot arrows, real arrows. Sansa and Rhaella cheered her for the achievement. She smiled at them and sat with them to talk. "So, how long does it take to sack a city?" she asked, a bit nervous. "It depends, Your Grace," Ser Barristan replied. "When Tywin Lannister sacked the capital, his men raped and killed for almost 7 days." The White Bull added, "Maybe the Slavers are giving a fight. You must be calm, Khaleesi. Our people and the Unsullied are the most ferocious warriors in the continent." "It is known," Irri said. "It is known," Jiki repeated. "And Sansa, my mother told me about your reunion," Dany said with a curious tone. Sansa blushed a little then. "Yes, Jon kept Lady safe with him," she said as she patted her direwolf's head. "But my cousin, he looks tormented." "Your Grace, is this Jon Snow your nephew?" the White Bull asked, surprised. "Indeed, he's my nephew and Rhaegar's true heir," Dany replied. "But I need to talk with him about his inheritance after taking Yunkai." "My lady, why is he so tormented?" Ser Barristan asks. "He didn't tell me much, but the Freys and Boltons betrayed him and Robb. I could be the last living Stark by now," she said as her voice started to break. Rhaella immediately hugged her. "I will avenge your family, Sansa. That's a promise. I will burn the twins to the ground," Dany said. She felt her blood boiling. Suddenly Ser Jorah arrived to inform about their success. He kneeled tired then. Dany noticed that he was covered in blood and worried. Ser Jorah read her expression and talked immediately. "Don't worry, Your Grace, this isn't my blood." "And where are Daario Naharis and Jon Snow?" she asked, and noticed the disappointment in the Bear Knight's face. She feared the worst. "They are in the city with Grey Worm," Jorah answered coldly. "The we shall go. Ser Oswell, make sure that our horses are saddled," she commanded. "Of course, Your Grace," the knight replied and left them. Dany didn't know how to feel about this Jon Snow, her nephew. Maybe he was the Mummer's dragon. With Sansa's words, she now recognized her as the Lonely Wolf. Maybe Jon Snow wasn't a man of trust. She needed to be cautious. She had reasons to doubt. He didn't present himself as her nephew when they met in the tent. He refused to talk with her, avoiding every contact. He only talked with her lady mother. Only her mother looked at him closer. She had to wait for a confirmation of her knights. She needed to be sure that he truly was Rhaegar's son, and she needed to probe that he wasn't following someone else's orders. She played a little with Rhaegal and Balerion. They grew bigger and bigger, but she felt that something made her children feel anxious. Jon Snow. After the executions were done, they rode for the city gates. Taking a man's life wasn't easy, but the sense of justice made him feel calm. What happened then surprised him. As he rode towards the main gates with his partners, many freed slaves started to cheer them. Kids were throwing flowers, showing real happiness after an entire life of abuse. "Snow. A man said, trying to touch his leg, and with him many more did the same." Jon was astonished with the reaction. "Snow, snow, snow," they repeated over and over again. "You reap what you sow, my friend," Daario laughed. "Any man brave enough to submit the masters is worthy of respect." The main gate was closer then. Both enormous gates opened to show the Unsullied formed around their queen. Many Dothraki riders screamed to celebrate their victory and raised their araks in the air. Daenerys Targaryen. They stood there in front of the city gates, waiting for them to be opened. A group of Unsullied was surrounding her and her companions. Her children were there too, laying at her feet. When the gates opened, Jon Snow emerged from a sea of people. They all used slave collars and were cheering him and his companions. He looked more confident than before the battle, but he looked pained too. He stopped in front of the Unsullied and made a bow. "The city is yours," he said, and retired to meet the other sellswords. She felt relieved then. He was alive. Daario Naharis had a rag over his shoulder. He unwrapped it to show her the city flag. The Harpy didn't rule anymore. "We make sure to replace it with your own flag, Your Grace," Daario Naharis said. The man looked prettier after the battle, but she couldn't imagine herself falling in love with a sellsword. Then the people walked closer to see her and her children. The Unsullied threatened them with their spears when they came too close. They all stopped and remained silent looking at her. This is Daenerys Targaryen, the Stormborn, the Unburnt, rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms, the mother of dragons. It is to her you owe your freedom. Missandei said in bastard Valyrian, but it didn't sound correct for Dany. How can I give them their freedom when it depends of them? She asked herself. No, she interrupted the translator. You do not owe me your freedom, because I can't give it to you. It's yours only and depends of you to take it. She said. Every slave remained silent, until one raised his hand. Mizza, he exclaimed, and then all the other slaves started to say the same. Mizza, what does it means? She asked Missandei. It is old Giscari, your grace, it means mother, her friend replied. Mother, she repeated for herself. These people will not harm me, she said, and walked towards her children. She patted their snouts and then ordered them to fly. Everybody was impressed with her children. Then she walked towards the crowd and mixed between the recently freed slaves. They raised her over their shoulders, and before she could notice, she was surrounded by hands trying to reach for her. The Dothraki loved her for her strength and her dragons, but the slaves loved her for her mercy. Two different loves colliding in one leader. After years of sacrifice, she was making impossible things possible, but this wasn't home. This just was something that she needed to do for this people. Sake. She spotted Jon's face then. He looked happy, but her stoic expression quickly returned when he noticed her looking at him. Dany was puzzled. Jon Snow was different from other men. He didn't look for her approval after taking the city. During the feast he just sat and drank wine. He then walked outside. She needed to talk with him, learn about his experiences, about what he wanted, revenge, take the throne, anything. She followed him through the streets until they reached for the city gates. He got out and remained there standing looking at the stars. She noticed the sound of her children's wings flapping. Balerion then stood in front of Jon. The young man froze looking at the black dragon in front of him. Balerion slowly bridged the distance between them, growling and showing his bare teeth. Smoke came out from his nostrils. Dany was about to intervene when another dragon came from the skies, pushing Balerion back. At first she thought in one of her children trying to fight for dominance, but she heard the creature's name. Caraxes. Stop! Jon exclaimed as both dragons started to make circles looking at each other. The dragon had crimson and white scales, but most of them were crimson. Valerion's molten gold eyes looking at a pair of red eyes. They were the same size. Both expulsed smoke from their nostrils, ready to burn each other. She tried to stop Balerion, but he didn't listen to her. When both dragons were about to bite each other, Jon Snow stopped them, standing between them. Both dragons knew who he was, a Targaryen, a man with the blood of old Valyria, just like her or her mother. Dany walked towards Balerion and calmed him, caressing his snout. Jon did the same, but he talked to the other dragon like a dog. They sat on a rock watching the skies, and their scaled companions left them alone then. How old is Caraxes? She asked. The air had a sweet taste after her realization. To be honest, I lost the count, maybe a couple of years. He replied, looking at the sky. He's bigger than Balerion. I assume that you hatched the egg before me. She chuckled. How did you got a dragon egg? My great uncle gave it to me. Jon replied coldly. Now, he was brooding again. Your great uncle? She asked, confused. Dany thought that the northern lords didn't know how to get a dragon egg. Well, he is our great uncle technically. Jon chuckled. He looked prettier when he smiled. And who's this mysterious great uncle? I need to know. Is he still alive? Dany was excited with the new discovery. Maester Aemon is pretty old. He's at the wall and wanted to bring him to me, but I made stupid mistakes and now I'm here without knowing if he's dead or alive. Jon said as he clenched his fist with pure rage. What will you do now? She asked. I'll stay with you and Sansa, for now. He replied. And what about your title? You're Rhaegar's heir. She started to feel nervous of his response. Nearly half of the Seven Kingdoms thinks that I'm just a bastard. The whole continent thinks that I'm dead. He took his time to finish the idea. For Dany, he looked conflicted by his actions. I don't want S crown. I just want to avenge my family. Let me burn the twins and the Dreadfort to the ground. Then I will find peace. Are you sure about it? She asked. I don't want anything else, he said, smiling. Dany felt happiness then. Her family started to grow now. She didn't have to carry the burden of being a Targaryen alone. They were the future of House Targaryen. She just thought about Maester Aemon. but didn't want to make too many questions. She knew that Jon Snow had a big burden that was almost smashing him. Let me help him. She made a little and silent prayer to the stars.